today's episode, all the evidence from Fiona Brown's time in the witness box, including some probing questions from the judge. Plus, later in the episode, what the lip reader saw. A quick note before we begin. This episode contains adult language and distressing concepts. We've used voice actors throughout the episode to bring you the words spoken in court. Fiona Brown has vehemently denied any cover-up of the alleged rape of Brittany Higgins by Bruce Lehrmann. Lehrmann is suing Network 10 and Lisa Wilkinson, saying their story defamed him and ruined his life. He denies any sexual contact occurred. At the end of her evidence in the federal court defamation matter on Tuesday morning, Fiona Brown, Brittany Higgins' former boss, was asked by Steve Wybrow SC, counsel for Bruce Lehrmann, if there'd been a cover-up.
There's none. Absolutely none. The story wasn't about the politicians. The story was about two staff members, and nobody would want to have staff reported on. You're not a politician. From my experience, the support mechanisms from someone in my situation wasn't there. These were two 23-year-olds, and there was no cover-up. The police were consulted, the Department of Finance was consulted, the Department of Parliamentary Services knew. There was no cover-up.
Brown referred to her own experience. She's talking about a suicide attempt and the devastation of her mental health, which she says resulted from being named by Brittany Higgins and Network 10's The Project in 2021 as part of a conspiracy to prevent Higgins going to the police. In court earlier in the trial, Higgins said Brown effectively threatened to end her employment.
So the conversations with Fiona started getting more and more tense. It suddenly became about the election. Fiona Brown was starting to ask me about the election. She used words to the effect of, "During the election, where would you want to be? You can go to WA or you can go home to the Gold Coast." And I said, well, I'd obviously want to be near my family. That would be great. And she said, well, they would just pay me out to go to the Gold Coast, but I wouldn't be working. And I said, okay, well, that would be fine, but how would I come back? And she said, well, you wouldn't.
In court on Tuesday, Fiona Brown denied saying this. Brown said at a meeting with Ms Higgins, she told her,
she could work out of Canberra if she wanted to. The minister was at that point keeping two staffers there. She thought it would be useful having someone on the East Coast. There was the opportunity to work on the campaign in WA because Ms Reynolds was up for re-election. And the other option was that we could organise a non-standard home base arrangement, so if she wished to work from home, she could. However, she expressed a desire to go to Brisbane to work for campaign headquarters because of Ben Dillaway. She was keen to work there, but that was not something. That was the only thing I had to say no to because it wasn't within my purview.
Ben Dillaway was a fellow staffer with whom Higgins had been romantically involved. Brown said she asked Scott Morrison's Chief of Staff, John Kunkel, for a non-standard home base arrangement for Brittany Higgins for personal and family reasons. Sue Chrysanthou SC, counsel for Lisa Wilkinson, asked what these were.
Because Ms Higgins, because of what had gone on in the last 2 weeks, and she had been to the police once, she hadn't made an allegation to the police. But nevertheless, it would have been a disruptive and emotional time. Being found in a state of undress and your colleagues knowing and your boss knowing, and it was simply from a welfare point of view.
The welfare issue was she said she'd been assaulted.
She never told us. She never told me she'd been assaulted.
At the conclusion of her evidence, Justice Michael Lee asked Chrysanthou, who had led the cross-examination, if he could assume there was no allegation Brown was part of a political conspiracy. Here's what the judge said.
I can proceed on the basis that no submission will be made Ms Brown was a knowing participant in a systemic cover-up of a rape.
Chrysanthou agreed, and Justice Lee dismissed Brown. But before that, it was a tough cross-examination. Chrysanthou put it to Brown she'd tampered with what Brown said were contemporaneous notes of the conversations she had with Lehrmann, Higgins and their boss, Senator Linda Reynolds, as well as other senior and powerful government figures. Brown flatly denied having tampered with the notes. Tuesday's hearing began with Chrysanthou referring to Brown's claim she was shocked when Scott Morrison's press secretary, Andrew Carswell, gave the project a statement including Brown's background briefing to him about what had happened. Brown agreed she'd exchanged text messages with another journalist, Samantha Maiden, in which she said Carswell would handle the response. In the witness box, Fiona Brown said she spoke to Carswell for his background only.
I was not aware that that information was going to be distributed to anybody. I didn't see him as a spokesperson for me.
Brown described 2 meetings in the days after she was alerted that in the early hours of March 23, 2019, 2 23-year-old staffers had come back to the office without permission. She said in the first meeting on Tuesday, March 26, Brittany Higgins did not indicate any sexual contact had occurred. That day, the Tuesday, Brown told Lehrmann to pack up his things, as it was the second security breach he'd been involved in. At that meeting, Brown says Lehrmann told her he came back to drink whiskey and had checked on Brittany Higgins before he left, and she was fine. Brown said she knew at that point Higgins had been found either naked, as the parliamentary security guard had reported, or semi-dressed, as Higgins herself said. On March 28, the Thursday, Brown said she met with Higgins again. Brown told the court on Monday Higgins said to her in that meeting,
"I remember him being on top of me."
In response, Brown said she told Higgins at the time,
If this is something you have not wanted, then you should think about reporting it. Has something happened you didn't want to have happened?
Brown said Higgins shook her head at this. Brown agreed with Sue Chrysanthu's suggestion her contemporaneous notes did not include that second question, has something happened you didn't want to have happened?
It was said. I didn't record it in my notes. They were not verbatim. I did the best I could of taking down what I could, and I did my professional best. I did ask that question. She said no.
Justice Michael Lee asked, given Brown's evidence about the trauma she'd suffered, it would be fair to use the contemporaneous note as
probably the best recollection that you would have, fairly, today, sitting in the witness box, with what occurred at these meetings, rather than your memory, given what's occurred to you since 2019.
I think that would be fair. But I think also that when you're asked to sit and think about something, say when that weekend occurred, you do reflect and you do remember things and you try not to have an affected memory, so you always go back to your notes.
Justice Lee needs to find whether, on the balance of probabilities, Lehrmann did or did not rape Higgins. It's his word against hers. That's why the judge is digging into these contemporaneous accounts. He wanted to know if it'd be fair to use Brown's notes from the time, where she did not use that phrase, "Did something happen you didn't want?" Brown agreed it would be fair. Chrysanthu later told the judge Brown had come up with that phrase only in 2022, 3 years after the alleged rape. Chrysanthu asked about the moment Brown heard Higgins say Lehrmann had been on top of her.
Did you think to yourself, fuck?
Something like that, yeah. I said that because it took me by surprise. It was different to the last few days. It came out of the blue. There was no hint that something like that would be said. It was just a blindside, and that's what took me by surprise.
Chrysanthu suggested it was an allegation Higgins had been sexually assaulted. Brown said she didn't take it like that.
I asked her these questions and I didn't get a positive response from her.
Ten's lawyers have said in this trial, Lehrmann's case theory is that Higgins made up her allegation of rape after seeing Lehrmann leave the building with his belongings, that Brittany Higgins claimed she'd been raped to avoid being sacked. Sue Chrysanthu sought to counter this idea in questions to Brown about what was said in the meeting of March 28. She wanted Brown to agree that Higgins couldn't have thought her job was at risk, so why would she make up an allegation of rape?
There was no suggestion by you to Ms Higgins that her job was at risk because of her entry into Parliament House on the weekend?
No, there was no risk to her job.
And you never suggested there was a risk to her job that day?
No.
Or any other time?
No.
At the first meeting on March 26, Brown said she gave Higgins the 1800 RESPECT number, a family and sexual violence counselling service. Brown said the number was part of a list of instructions from the Department of Finance for handling the situation. She said she presumed they'd provided the number because Higgins had been seen by security in a state of undress. On Sunday, 31 March, Brown exchanged text messages with Higgins to confirm an appointment to see Linda Reynolds the next day, when they met at 8:40am in Minister Reynolds' private office on April 1. Brown offered for Higgins to bring along her father as a support person.
I want to suggest to you by this point, you are in no doubt that it was in that office that Ms Higgins had been found by a security guard naked.
We were in no doubt that she had been found naked. According to the Department of Parliamentary Services, naked, according to Ms Higgins, semi-naked or semi-undressed, asleep on the couch.
Miss Reynolds said that if you go to the police, we will support you.
Yes.
And if you decide to go to the police, please keep us informed.
Yes.
And an arrangement could be made to speak to the AFP liaison officer in Parliament House.
Yes.
And the minister said she was sorry for what had happened to Miss Higgins or something to that effect.
I don't recall. I remember Minister Reynolds talking about the importance to be in control and how she'd had experience in life where she had suppressed things, and she was encouraging Ms Higgins, if she had something she wished to say or report, that she had every support to do that, and we would try and set that up for her if that's what she wanted.
Then Chrysanthou put to Brown two things Brittany Higgins has claimed Senator Reynolds said to her.
And as part of that exchange, Senator Reynolds said words to the effect, "I'm sorry, these are things women go through."
No.
And said, "I didn't think he was capable of this."
No.
Brown agreed she had said words to the effect, "People always gossip in Parliament House, and it was important that Ms Higgins not engage in it."
And the reason is Miss Higgins said something like she was concerned everyone knew about it and people were talking about it.
No.
And she was concerned people had seen the CCTV.
No, that never came up. The CCTV never came up.
Brown said her remark about gossip was about,
We've all been subject to gossip and nonsense. It's Parliament House.
Brown said at the end of the meeting or later that day, Higgins said she wanted to talk to the Australian Federal Police. Brown said she rang the AFP in the building and they came upstairs.
The police actually came up to our office, and when they arrived, they looked kind of cop-like. I can't remember if they were uniformed or just had guns. I thought that was not good. I asked if I could walk to their office. Can I walk with you so we know where it's at? They said yes. I said I'll be back in a tick. Went up and got Ms Higgins. Are you happy for me to walk you? She said yes. We had a chat on the way. I offered to stay, attend, or pick her up afterwards, and she didn't want any of that.
Coming up, why Fiona Brown feared she could be sacked. Fiona Brown told the federal court that after the March 28 meeting, where she says Higgins had said Lehrmann was on top of her but had not claimed to be raped, she had a series of heated conversations about the matter with her boss, Linda Reynolds, and senior government figure Alex Hawke, who was Scott Morrison's Special Minister of State. Brown said even before Higgins had made an allegation of assault, the ministers wanted to go to police, regardless of what Higgins wanted. Brown said she resisted and even feared she could lose her job for defying her bosses. Brown said she believed the ministers were trying to protect themselves. So, this is an allegation from Brown not of a cover-up of the rape, as Higgins has claimed, but that ministers wanted it all out in the open, regardless of what Higgins herself wanted. Brown said Brittany Higgins had said she did not want to make a police report and wanted to speak to her father before making a decision. Brown said the Department of Finance executive Lauren Barons agreed with her that she could not make a report without Ms Higgins' consent. Sue Chrysanthou put to Brown,
You understood, didn't you, from your conversation with Minister Reynolds, that Minister Reynolds understood that there had been an allegation of a crime?
No. Ms Higgins had had a recollection, and she felt that based on that, even without a complaint, even without a straight-out accusation, she felt I should take it down to the police and say these two people came in after hours and they were drunk and the female had a recollection. To me, I needed more than that, and I didn't have the right. It was Ms Higgins' right.
Brown said she understood
that a complainant needed to be in control of any part of their situation, and it was up to them to be in control. So Ms Higgins still had not given me an allegation. She had a recollection, but she'd never stated. So therefore, I had to allow her agency.
Brown said she spoke to a senior colleague, Dean Carson, the press secretary travelling with Minister Reynolds, and he agreed with her view. She could not report it. Alex Hawke's chief of staff, Reg Chamberlain, rang her and said Hawke wanted the matter reported to the AFP because the ministers are the lawmakers, according to Brown's notes. Sue Chrysanthu asked Brown about that.
And you understood that Alex Hawke, the minister, was of the view that an allegation of a breach of law had been made?
It was not put to me like that at all.
And it would be utterly terrible if the ministers, as lawmakers, did not do something about it?
No.
What was your understanding of the ministers are the lawmakers? What did that mean to you?
That he felt it was best if I went to police and there was no consideration of Ms Higgins. Consideration for themselves, but not Ms Higgins.
You felt they were covering themselves. That's all they were worrying about?
Yes.
You understood that the reasons why Minister Reynolds and Minister Hawke, through his Chief of Staff, were directing you to report the matter to the AFP was not because they cared about Ms Higgins, but because they were worried about covering themselves so they could say they did something that afternoon?
Yes.
You insisted to the point by the afternoon that you thought you might be fired because you were refusing to follow the minister's direction, two ministers' directions.
Yes.
Brown said Linda Reynolds told her to go to a police station, and when she realised Brown was not in Canberra, said she should go to any regional police station and report there'd been an alleged rape. Fiona Brown said 7 days later, Linda Reynolds was informed by Australian Federal Police Assistant Commissioner Leanne Close on Thursday, 4 April 2019, in an 8:30am phone call, that a sexual assault had been reported to the AFP by Ms Brittany Higgins. Brown said she was not informed until the next morning, and this was the first time she was aware that there was an allegation of assault. On Tuesday afternoon, the court also heard from a forensic lip reader named Timothy Reedy. He was flown out from the UK by TEN's counsel, Dr Matthew Collins KC. Reedy has been reading lips professionally since 2010 and covered high-profile events like the coronation of King Charles for news outlets in the UK. He's also recently worked with law enforcement in Britain to extract information from police body cam footage. But this was the first time giving evidence and being cross-examined in court for Mr Reedy. Reedy is deaf, so he gave evidence with the assistance of a lip speaker. That's someone who repeats the lawyer's questions in an expressive way so he can understand them clearly. In an interesting quirk of the legal system, the lip speaker took a special oath of her own, vowing that she'd accurately convey those questions to Reedy. It's called the lip speaker's oath. Reedy prepared an expert report on the CCTV that captured interactions between Lehrmann and Higgins at the Dock pub on the night of the alleged assault. That CCTV footage came up early in the trial when Lehrmann and Higgins were in the witness box. It's where Higgins can be seen abandoning her Bumble date, where people shout rounds, where some pizza is consumed, and where Lehrmann allegedly places a number of alcoholic drinks in front of Higgins and says, according to Timothy Reedy, all hers, all hers. Lehrmann denied that in the witness box. Reedy was confident the video footage was lip-readable, though some parts were clearer than others. He said he believed more than half of the transcript he provided was accurate. Reedy said he spent a good 3 days studying the videos provided to him by Collins in order to produce his report. He said his job becomes impossible when people turn away from the camera, but is able to determine what people say in the short spaces of time where their faces and mouths are visible. He told the court he used a handful of digital tools to sharpen and magnify the CCTV footage. Under cross-examination by Steve Wybrow, the barrister representing Lehrmann, Reedy said this was the first time he's used software to enlarge and enhance footage. He said that's because reading video footage, and CCTV in particular, which tends to be of a lower quality than the kind of vision we see on TV or at the movies, isn't as effective as the lip reading he does when he's interacting with someone face to face. Reedy conceded that different spellings and pronunciations of words can cause inaccuracies when he's reading CCTV footage too.
Lip reading with people every day is something entirely different because patterns are different, accents are different, and objects have different names in different areas, and there's dialects to think about.
And you get, in real-life communication, context to assist in understanding what somebody is saying?
That's not correct.
And you don't have the advantage when you're reviewing video where at some times you cannot see the people's lips and you cannot get full sentences?
That's correct.
And where the topics might change quickly?
It can, but going back, sometimes you'll come up with words that turn out to be different later on.
Reedy made a note in his report that Bruce Lehrmann was lining up drinks, plying the woman with alcohol. Wybrow asked if that was an assumption Reedy had made based on what he saw in the video, and Reedy responded that he'd seen other context clues in the footage that suggested that was the case, including that the man was encouraging her to drink everything that was on the table. At that moment, Reedy believed Lehrmann told Higgins to drink it all, and she responded, "I don't want to." Lehrmann also denied that when he was in the witness box. He said his inference that Lehrmann was plying Higgins provided important context for that reading. Wybrow pointed out that Higgins' head was positioned side on when this particular interaction was captured. He also told Reedy that Higgins had told the court she was drinking to get drunk, but Reedy said he couldn't know what her intentions were from the footage.
You speak of being able to lip read full sentences in optimum circumstances.
Correct.
You would agree that this task was not optimum circumstances.
I disagree.
In your report, you say optimum circumstances is when the speaker is in good light, standing still, facing the lip reader, with no obscuring of the face or lips. Can you explain why you say she didn't want to?
First of all, given the circumstances and the environment, when the woman said she didn't want to, she didn't mean it in a formal way, but more of a teasing way, a very light-hearted way. But she was encouraged, she was enticed to drink it all. So the woman decided it was in her best interest, if you like, to drink it all because they were simply winding down for the night.
Mr. Reedy, do you agree that your opinions go beyond simply lip reading, but making certain assessments as to the surrounding circumstances and context?
I can only work with what I have with me.
Wybrow put it to Reedy that his task was an inherently difficult one. He suggested his unfamiliarity with Australian accents, his lack of formal training, and the quality of the CCTV made it more so. But Reedy said his life and professional experience meant he was confident in the report he produced for trial. Justice Michael Lee said after Reedy left the witness box that observing his evidence had been a novel experience.